Hi, Jamie.
Good morning, Carlos. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Wonderful. For a Friday.
Yes.
I was thinking, who scheduled this on a Friday? And then I think I have nobody to blame but myself. But at least for us, it's Friday morning. So, we'll still be raring to go.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Tekla.
Hi, Jamie. I just thought I'd check some emails real quick.
I was thinking
logged in, so I wasn't late.
I was thinking maybe you were trying to make up for the. I was sitting there with Susan, and she showed me your email about.
Oh God, that's embarrassing.
I was starting late, so I thought, oh, maybe you're just showing up early to make up for that.
You know what's horrible about that kind of a thing? So more people have to tell me no, because my husband's always like, everything just works out for you, doesn't it? And because I'm late, I'm like, hey, can I still do this? And someone's like, yeah, I can make that work for you, and that's amazing. And it doesn't work out for me a lot, and it's a bad habit. But I appreciate everyone bearing with me.
Carlos, can you see my screen?
Yep, I can see it just fine.
Does anybody else hear Jamie in a small voice and not a big voice?
No? Jamie, will you talk again?
Yes, I can talk again. And Susan, you are looking like you're Jamie, so you might want to rename yourself to Susan.
Let's see if I can do that.
So if Jamie's talking in a small voice, Susan, you look like a small person back there.
I know. It's the advantage. You don't have to quite do yourself up as much.
I can hear you fine, Jamie. Carlos's voice is bigger than yours, but I can still hear you okay.
Okay. I'll try to speak louder.
I can probably move closer too. Let's see if I can.
Sometimes, Susan, it has to do, oh yeah, it's that room that you're in.
Oh.
Technology would not be happy with me if I pulled off the screen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Jean.
It's a cool morning.
Nice.
Feels like fall.
This is probably better. So what's the temperature, Jean?
It was in the 40s this morning, low 40s actually.
Yeah.
It feels nice and crisp. One of those mornings where you just want to sleep in, right? Yeah. Right now it's 51, so that's not too cool, but cool enough from what it's been.
Yeah.
What's DC like, Carlos?
Actually pretty cool this morning, but just very gloomy. Better than our DC summer, so.
Yeah. Well, we still have triple digits here in Shasta County.
Oh, wow.
Added up. Yeah, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, still triple digits.
Wow.
Veronica wore North State Together colors. Thank you for that, Veronica. The proper color blue. My green isn't quite working. It's actually the same green as what's on the screen, but it doesn't look like it.
Oh, I love that. So
Yeah.
fun.
I like to match the slideshows.
Well, I brought my matching water bottle for
Oh,
it.
good job.
Balance it out a little bit.
Susan, good job. Your green looks like the green on the screen. And my husband told me I couldn't wear my standard Zoom sweats from, 1980. I was wearing them, as a matter of fact, and he said, no. Knowing you, you'll get up and forget your video is on or something.
A lot more.
I thought you just had to always make sure you were only like waist up.
Yes. That's what I've been doing.
Now you're going to make me completely paranoid.
You're totally
I'm Marie
right.
Caldwell, by the way. Jamie,
Hi, Marie. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you.
I like to think it all just adds a little bit of humanity to
Right.
our
I think so.
as we invite
Right.
ourselves into each other's homes.
Well,
It's
humanity got real the other night. I was telling Susan this awful story, and I won't tell the whole story because it's worse than even the short clip. But I was at a board meeting for our local YMCA, and we were doing some really good strategic planning session. And I had just unmuted myself and talked about, the things we could do for the youth in our community and how we could better serve. Yes. And then I have this trick. So if you see me doing it, you'll know, where if I'm yelling or talking at my daughter, I kind of go like this over my face so that people don't know that, I have a child back there, But this time I had already told her on mute about 25 times to please bring me a glass of water. So this is the 26th time that I'm saying it, but rather than saying it, I yell like a maniac. I mean, you would think that somebody would call CPS on me. It was pretty bad. And I didn't even know. I did my thing. And then I glanced down at my phone and another board member had said, hey, unless you want to get us to get you a glass of water, you might want to put yourself on video. So that was real. And then yesterday I was interviewing this lovely lady. We had some engagement interviews. I didn't know her. I'd only met her once. And my dog jumps up twice right here onto the top of my desk. Here we are.
I feel your pain, Jamie. In fact, I'm watching my two dogs like roughhousing right here and thinking at any moment one of the kids is going to do whatever it is they do, what they shouldn't be doing. So, yeah.
Part of the fun.
Yeah.
I know, really. I'm with you. I'm going to take it. That's a slice of humanity. I did the same thing. I thought I was on mute and I have my earbud in. So I got up and I put my video off. So, and I went into the bedroom to, get off the phone. You need to be doing this, that, the other. It's 10:30. Have you gotten on your Zoom? And I hear Christina Van Alphen, who'll be here on a little bit, if she's not on already, say, Marie, you might want to mute. Sorry, Christina. And then, Christina, I have to tell you that, so this was the other really great mute story, and I don't know if I've already told this to some people in the group, but we were on a collective impact team, and we had two meetings back to back, and in the first meeting, someone did that. They turned around, they forgot to mute, and they were talking to a colleague, and, pretty good conversation, and we're all yelling, mute, mute, but she didn't hear because she turned it down, right? And so then we all kind of got a laugh, and then we were in like the very next meeting, and there was with my colleague that I work with, George from WorkCal RC&D, and so we're in this discussion, we're having this great discussion, and all of a sudden it looks like he answers the phone, like I thought he was on the phone, and so we're like, George, mute, mute, and so he looks at us kind of shocked, and he mutes, and then he doesn't say anything the rest of the meeting, and this is a funny communication, right? since this is about communication. And so he doesn't say anything the rest of the meeting. So a little bit later in the afternoon, I was in the office. I said, George, you were pretty quiet. And he's like, well, you told me to mute, and I don't know what I'd said, but I figured we'd talk about it later. That was, I said, oh my gosh, that was awful. I'm like, oh, we thought you were on the phone. So then I had to tell him the previous story. But anyway, we got it worked out. But communication in the age of Zoom, I think, is incredibly challenging. For all of those reasons.
And when you strip away all of that just human interaction, where we're relying so much on Slack or email or little bits and pieces, and oh man, it just requires a lot of really explicit communication that is probably good practice in general, but it's not easy.
Right. And I'd be interested, since we're not quite ready to start, are we? I don't want to sidetrack us, but I'd be interested to hear from the group how they're doing in interacting with people that you don't necessarily have a long time relationship to, because I've noticed that really makes a difference too. If you are, interacting, like, when inadvertently I was very rude and muted somebody that I didn't need, that was not okay to say mute, just a misunderstanding. But because I work with him closely, we were able to talk about it. Now we joke, and he thinks it's funny to, mute himself and do this, so that I'm like, okay, that's funny. But how are people interacting and dealing with people that they don't necessarily know? You miss those cues, right? You miss those interactions. Anybody got any good ideas?
I can say that I've met a few people in Zoom meetings, and it's been great because traveling to Modoc County is difficult anyways, and so I think I've actually been able to network a little bit better. But I think getting to know somebody when they're in their home environment is kind of nice, because I can see, well, as you can hear my kid crying right now, and you kind of get to know them. Come here, buddy. Come here. You get to know them on a different level. I just met a lady from Chico State yesterday, and it was like that. She's in her living room, and one of my sons, it was early morning, so he had just woken up, and he comes out and says hi to her, and we had this kind of conversation about just our life outside of work. And so I think that part has been nice. I think it's harder with larger groups, because a lot of people either no-show or they keep their camera off, and that is really kind of difficult. I feel like it's like I'm talking to a wall.
Right.
Right. So that part's been tough.
Right.
Well,
and it's funny because Tanya and I have only met on Zoom. We have yet to have an interaction, right? But I feel like I know her really well, and I feel like she's a buddy I could call and say, "Hey, I'm stuck. Can you take my kids?" Or whatever.
Absolutely.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Kevin from the North State Together team. It looks like we have a great group on hand, so we can get started if that's okay. Again, my name is Kevin. I'm a proud member of the North State Together team. So right up front, I want to thank the NST team. We had this scheduled for March 16th, and the Hattaway folks were so wonderful. They were ready to fly out to Redding, California, and give us an in-person presentation, and then COVID hit. And there's an old saying in poker, sometimes you have to play a poor hand well. And so we are playing this as well as we can, and we're actually really excited about the day. And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie in a little bit to thank Hattaway. But again, thanks to the NST team for doing this, and thanks to everybody who's in attendance right now. We know that your schedules are super crazy, and so thank you for joining us. I do want to say we do have a member, a clairvoyant member on the NST team. Her name is Susan. And so before COVID even hit, she was trying to get gift baskets together for all the attendees. And one of the things that she had ordered for everybody was North State Together hand sanitizer.
Oh my God.
And so if you're ever looking for lucky lottery numbers, contact Susan. So Again, welcome. Thank you. We're excited about the day, and I'll turn it over to Jamie to introduce our special guest.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited that so many of you could make it today. This morning I woke up and I thought, who scheduled this on a Friday? And then I realized I did. So no one to blame but me. So hopefully you all have your caffeine. I did a Starbucks run this morning. But we want to first start off, I think, by thanking the McConnell Foundation for their ongoing support and commitment to improving educational outcomes in our region. And I know and I'm sure all of we wish we could be face-to-face right now in their beautiful facilities like we were planning on before the pandemic. Especially if you're, I think, like me, in your living room, it just doesn't quite compare to the atmosphere at the McConnell Foundation. So thank you, McConnell Foundation. And I believe Kelly Salter is here on the line and with us today. And I want to give a specific shout out to all of the support that she gives the work that each of us are doing in this region. So thank you, Kelly, for being here and for your continual support. And we would also like to thank our very own Dr. Kate Mahar, who leads our Lumina Talent Hub. With Kate's work with North State Together and the Lumina Talent Hub, we have been able to bring nationally known professional experts to us and to our region, such as Hattaway Communications today. So thank you, Kate, and thank you, Lumina Foundation, for providing and funding this opportunity to work with Hattaway Communications this morning. And we also want to thank all of you for your hard work that has allowed our region to be one of only 26 communities in the entire nation to be awarded the Lumina Talent Hub designation. And then I'm really excited this morning about what we have ahead of us and the dynamic Hattaway team. Oops, sorry. That will be joining us and is with us today. And that's Veronica Selzer, who is the Director of Hattaway Communications, and their Senior Associate, Carlos Diaz. And Susan and I have had the opportunity to get to know these two a bit over the last, I think it's been almost a year, as we were first planning the face-to-face summit in March, and then now, of course, this rescheduled virtual workshop. And I can tell you that over the course of the next couple of hours, you will not be bored. These two are not only experts in communication strategies, but are also super engaging. And the framework that they are going to teach us this morning is meaningful and relevant to our work and will provide us with tangible takeaways. So I want to welcome and thank Veronica and Carlos for being here, albeit virtually, all the way from Washington, D.C. And we look forward to the day when you can come and visit us in person and we can show you all that far Northern California has to offer. So I know this workshop that they do and put on for the Lumina Talent Hubs is normally a lot longer than 2.5 hours. So we have a lot to pack in very shortly today, as you can see from the agenda. But I do want to give a heads up before we get started that after the summit today, we will be sending out to each of you a post-summit survey. So we ask you to please complete it and give us your feedback. Our team at North State Together looks at these surveys and uses them to guide where we put our efforts and our resources based upon your needs. So, and last but not least, okay, we will be having a drawing for a basket of regional North State goodies valued at $100 that will be mailed to you. In order to win, though, you have to be present and engaged until the very end of the summit today. And we will announce the winner at the end. So, expect more, Tehama. You cannot ask me how we are going to measure engagement. No, I've had that question from you a few times. It's a secret how we're going to do it today. So just try to act as engaged as you can. And with that, I will hand it over to the amazing Hattaway team. So Veronica and Carlos, the virtual floor is all yours.
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Okay, so again, thank you so much for that introduction. Like Jamie said, my name is Carlos Diaz, and I'm joined here with my colleague, Veronica Selsler. Like Jamie said, we were very excited to visit you all in person. Hopefully one day we will be able to, but I think we packed a really good, fun, interactive session for you all. One thing before we want to start, we just want to acknowledge that, and it was mentioned in the beginning of the call, you know, we're all trying to figure out how to navigate working from home and maintaining our life balance. So just want to make an acknowledgement for that we hope to have an interactive session. We know sometimes it's hard to be connecting with others virtually, but we hope everyone gives it their best try and comes out of something useful that they learned today. I'll let Veronica introduce herself, but as she's doing that, if folks would want to just share in the chat box, sort of introduce themselves with their name, role, and then just what's one thing that they hope to learn today, that would just be good to kick off in the conversation. And just one technical note, if everyone can make sure that their Zoom display name matches their own name. I pre-assigned breakout rooms, but there may be a few folks that haven't been assigned. I just want to make sure that everyone's in the correct Zoom rooms. I know some of us share computers, Zoom accounts with other people in our home, so just want to make sure of that. Veronica?
Perfect. Oh, so great to be here, even if it is virtual today. So my name is Veronica Selsler, and I am the director at Hattaway Communications. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation, partly because I have been working with Lumina Foundation for the last several years on different aspects of their work, in part trainings and just communication support like these for their grantees across the country. And we'll speak a little bit to this, and there's a lot more where it came from, but helping Lumina figure out how they communicate about racial equity and developing a racial equity frame for their own communications, and what a meaningful conversation about equity actually looks like that drives us to action. And so just a seed that there's a lot of really valuable resources that I will mention, but we could spend hours and hours on that. And so there will be, we'll make sure to point you to where you can get some of those resources there, but looking forward to kind of bridging all of those conversations today.
Yeah. So just before we start, just a little bit more about who Hattaway Communications is. We are a strategic communications firm based in Washington, D.C. And sort of our mission is that we use the power of strategy, science, and storytelling to help visionary leaders like you all and your organizations to help achieve ambitious goals that benefit people and the planet. And that comes across in many different ways. We work with a variety of clients in the foundation, the nonprofit, the higher education fields, including Indiana University, Gettysburg College, from Harvard University, and we've held them in a many variety in different ways. We do a lot of narrative research work to find out what are the main narratives out there about either higher education, or we all work with other organizations like Unidos US, which is the largest Latino advocacy group in the United States, to map what's the current narrative about Latinos living in the US, to help them do some messaging work around that. We also work, like Veronica said, with the Lumina Foundation over the last year. We've traveled, before COVID, all over the country giving these trainings in person with such varied and diverse groups of organizations like yours. And we've also done a lot of work about communicating about racial equity, which we're gonna see some insights about that in our session today.
So I'm seeing some folks share, thank you, in the chat, a few people who are saying how valuable some sort of elevator pitch would be, getting kind of clarity on brand and non-jargony messaging. That is great. You're in the right place. All of our work and the work that we do at Hattaway is really focused on communications for impact and not self-promotion. We're very lucky to work with all of these awesome organizations that are doing real work, right? We're not just selling, I don't know, pantyhose or something. And so this allows us to really focus on making real change in the world. So that's where we will put our energy in helping you with your comms today. And so some good breakout groups and conversation and sharing. So thank you all.
Yeah, So what we're hoping to accomplish by the end of the session today is to have an outline of what your shared aspirational narrative is. And I'm sure you're all thinking, what is an aspirational narrative? And that is a question that we're going to be answering shortly and show you how you can build your own. And we're going to have a few exercises along the way that lead us to building your own 1-minute message. So we're going to be seeing a few elements of what make up a narrative. We're going to have a few exercises that you can start drafting some ideas. So when we get to the portion of the breakout rooms where people are going to interact with each other and help each other build their 1-minute message, you're already going to have most of it written. It's just a matter of piecing it together. So we're mostly going to be sharing at the first or like part of the session a lot through the chat box and have people just jot down their own ideas. When we get to the part of the 1-minute message, that's where we're going to go into breakout rooms, and then we'll have each group sort of share out some of what they did as a group. Okay, just going to jump in. First, we're going to start off with some theory. I promise it's not all going to be theory, but this is going to be, I think, interesting for most of you that have to communicate with a variety of audience. So we're going to start with some science and theory, and we use science in a few ways at Hattaway. This section is going to focus mostly on theories that help us figure out what's going on inside people's hearts and minds. We're going to review things like cognitive, social, and motivational psychology in very simple terms that apply directly to communication. So this is the science about motivation and persuasion. First off, starting off with one of the first fundamental lessons that you need to know. There are two mental systems that work together to drive our decision-making and our behavior: the intuitive system and the cognitive system. The intuitive system is the one that dominates the mental process. It's the system about first impressions, emotional responses, those gut reactions we have when we see or hear or read something. The cognitive system is what we think of as thinking. It's about reasoning, seeking information, weighing alternatives, making calculations. It kicks in after intuition, but it's only if your intuition isn't capable of solving a problem itself. Now, we use the cognitive system much less often than we would like to think, and much less often than we probably would like others to do, especially for those that work in communications who have to be communicating with different audiences. We would like to think those messages and those emails, those newsletters, those reports that we spent so much time crafting and putting those words together that people are going to be deep in thought with them. But the reality sometimes is that it's not. We are bombarded with 1,000 messages a day, from emails, texts, your Slack messages, memos, newsletters, that people spend very few mental energy about when reading new materials, new messages. So when we want to be crafting our messages, we want to keep them simple, so it appeals to intuitive system. Once we appeal to intuitive system, then we can get into cognition. When people are seeing a new message, they want to capture it quick and fast. A good example to think about this, it's imagine if you're walking down or driving down a street that you walk or drive through all the time. Back when we used to walk to work or the store or whatever, and it's that same route you take every single time. Now, if somebody stops you along the way and asks you, what's 2 times 5? The answer is going to pop immediately into your head. That's an example of intuition. You have to spend very few mental energy thinking about it. It doesn't take any mental effort to recollect that. Now, imagine you're doing that same walk, but then somebody just asks you, what's 12 times 15? To get to the answer, most of us who are maybe not the best at math will probably have to stop and think about it. I've only added 1 digit to the equation, and it's already taxing our mental capacity so much that we can't keep walking. You would have to stop and think about it. So when you think about the messages that your organizations are putting out, people aren't going to stop and think about your cause or your mission, because it's a lot to spend that precious mental energy. It doesn't mean that they don't care about it. It just means we have to appeal to that intuitive, immediate system that people can give us a gut reaction to. So when we speak in the messages, we have to appeal to the heart and the head and make our language intuitive enough that they immediately understand it. Another way to think about this is through the fluency theory. The fluency theory says that studies demonstrate an inverse relationship between semantic, visual, and conceptual complexity and the perceived credibility of the information conveyed. Now, in other words, that means people are more likely to trust information they easily understand. These two messages say the exact same thing. Just one will probably take most of us a lot of mental energy to even decipher what it is that it's trying to say, while the other one, we can immediately understand it. It's a gut reaction. People are more likely to trust information they easily understand. Simplicity is your friend. To increase the motivating power of your messages, we need to focus on using words, messages, stories that are intuitive and have, positive frames in people's minds. And we're going to be talking about narrative framings shortly. But first, we'd like to introduce the first of our communications model that we use at Hattaway and which guide a lot of the work that we do. For our language not only has to be simple, it also has to be powerful and motivating. This image that you see here unpacks a number of theories from psychology that you can use to communicate with maximum motivating power. It says that you have to connect with people on multiple levels, starting with the very bottom, the functional one. That is the very basic level that just describes what it is that your organization, that your initiative, that your program does. Many of our clients get stuck at this level because you all work on very complex problems, and the solutions to those problems have a lot of factors included in them. It's not easy to simplify your message. So a lot of our clients spend a lot of time trying to unpack what it is, what do we do, and try to explain to any new audience all the details of our programs, but it's not enough to just for people to understand what your program does. They also have to care about it. In order for do that, we have to move up this model. So moving out to the next level, the emotional one, that's the one that connects the head to the heart. And this is important because emotion works hand in hand with cognition and helps us in attention, retention, and motivation. So your message has to compete against thousands of others bombarding our audience every day. So it's very critical that our communications create emotional reactions to people because it'll make it easier for them to remember your message and your words. The next level moving up is the social. And this is what psychologists have a theory called social proof. So we look at others to see what causes they are supporting. So when people consider joining an organization or get involved in supporting a cause, they want to see who else is supporting that cause. Who are the people that cause benefits? So this is a theory. This is one advice we're going to review later on. But when we're talking about the people who are ultimately benefit from our work, we want to talk about them in using asset framing, meaning we want to highlight their positive qualities so others relate to them or they admire them, because we're inspired to join those who motivate us or that we like or admire, and we look for those social cues. And lastly, at the top of the model is the aspirational level, and this is the one that we want our messages to hit. The aspirational level is about our aspirations or ideas about the kind of people that we want to strive to be, the kind of lives that we want to live in, the kind of communities we want to live in. And it's those authentic aspirations that drive our decision-making every day. And we're going to give you a few examples of what aspirations can look like. Because it's not only about, if we think about it in the model of higher education, it's not about obtaining a degree. It's about obtaining learning that will help you advance and have a career that motivates you, a meaningful career that motivates you and gets you to the life that you want. So that's where we want to ultimately get with our message, because people's decisions and behaviors are strongly influenced by desires they hold for the future. So these aspirations motivate people to overcome the challenges and work towards goals. And we're going to help you identify what are those aspirations as part of your program or your initiative or your organization that others could relate to. So just to recap, and we'll share this presentation after this end so people have all this information, and also link you all to our website that has a lot of more useful case studies and tools. But just to recap, when we're talking about communicating with motivating power, we want to remember 4 things. We want to appeal to the authentic aspirations of your audience, our ideas about the kind of people we want to live, that we want to be, and the life we want to live drive our behaviors. Number 2, we need to help people see themselves in your cause. We look to others for cue about what you think and do, particularly people who are similar to us. So when we're describing people in our messages, let's make sure we're describing them in ways that others relate to or admire. 3rd, we want to speak to the head and the heart. because emotion works with cognition and it helps us with attention, retention, and motivation. It'll be much more likely for audiences to understand and to remember a message if they feel something about that message. And lastly, we want to keep it super simple. Like we said, humans were not hardwired to expend our precious mental energy. And even now, if we're thinking about it, since the COVID quarantine started, we're on Zoom meetings all day. Our attention has to be on the screens all the time. So when we're trying to read a new message or sending an email or a campaign or something, it has to be very simple so people can immediately understand what is happening. So I'm going to pause there and let people, maybe if they have questions, put them in the chat.
We again encourage, I know some of you know each other, some of you don't, but can all learn from each other. And so if and as you want to use the chat while we're chatting to share examples or questions or ideas, we definitely encourage that.
Yeah.
And so, Anna, you ask communication technique different for youth or children. I mean, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever quite thought about that before. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be. Obviously, the content is different, but in terms of if you think about some of the lessons that Carlos is talking about, I mean, looking to others for social proof theory, for example. I mean, think of the first time when you were a kid, when you looked to somebody else to like their cool jacket that they were wearing and you wanted one too. These things are really hardwired into who we are as people. And especially as we're inviting people into learning new things, this is sort of the place that you start with communications. And so it opens us up to be thinking more deliberately about whatever the issue is or the project that you're working on. But it creates a groundwork to open that up. And I would also point folks, if this is really interesting to you, Thinking Fast and Slow, the book where we really pull a lot of the initial work that you were talking about in terms of intuition and cognition, Carlos, that's a great place to dig into some of the psychology behind this. And so, yeah, Kate, I would encourage you. It's really interesting. It's really fun to dig into.
Okay. Now we're gonna.
Oh, I know. First, I worked really closely with Packard Foundation and the work that they did in early learning. And so the sing, talk, read, it is. I mean, it's simple and it's easy to retain and repeat. Again, as we get to language that is easy to share, right? If we're driving people toward action, talk, read, sing is something that every parent can remember and tell to their friends when they're talking with, the mother that lives in their hall. And so it's really easy to be able to move folks toward action when you focus on something small that then opens the door to more learning.
Mm-hmm. My mom has early stages of Alzheimer's, and it's fascinating. I mean, just to hear her, when she watches the video or watches the advertisement on TV, she'll sing with it, talk, read, sing. And then you hear 2-year-olds do the same. You can really create a picture and an action by just those simple few words that come together so beautifully for that continuum, of that cradle to careers to and beyond.
And it's great. I think that also brings up something that I don't know if we dig in much in here, but in terms of how you actually apply these messages where they show up in different types of platforms, like, PowerPoint slide, printed ad, or watching an ad, thinking about message, image, and story, all of those things are really important tools to be thinking about when you're crafting content out of these core messages that we'll be talking about today. So what is the language? What are the words? What images are you using that do all the things, all the aspirational, emotional, social things that we want the communications to do? And then the story, how are we really showing these ideas in action? So seeding that is just one other thing to be thinking about and draw from.
Okay.
So equity. we're talking a lot about equity these days, everyone. If you weren't, and I imagine many of you are necessarily really spending a lot of time in working and thinking about equity and racial equity in your own work already. You know, we're now in an environment where it's kind of ubiquitous, and we have gushers saying tweets about how they support racial justice. And what we really want to do is make sure that when we're communicating about something like racial equity that is deeply important and also deeply nuanced, and means, frankly, a lot of different things to different people, that we're being super, super clear about actually what we're talking about. So I would love to turn it to you all in the chat. If you share some of the words that come to mind when you think about equity, when you think of equity.
Yeah, how would you define it to other audiences?
Yeah. We got level playing fields, overdue, yes. Removing barriers, access, equal opportunity, fairness, all levels, not equal, fair, including, inclusion, equal access. We'll come back to this a little bit later, but I want to just draw your attention to a lot of these physical metaphors that are showing up, and our brains work to process things through metaphor. There's a reason why they exist. And so it's really common to see some of these conversations about, you know, rebalancing or removing barriers. Yep, Patrick, not only having an equal number of tools and access, but the correct tools and access relevant to the individual. It's kind of tailored sense, individualized, yeah, having resources. So we asked, and again, feel free to continue the conversation, but we asked essentially the same question at the start of a national opinion and message testing survey for Lumina Foundation this past fall. So as context, end of last year, and have been kind of with the purpose of understanding and supporting their communications and program staff to think about how to better communicate about racial equity, especially with audiences who aren't already in that same social justice space. Because for things to really transform, we need to engage these wider circles. And so the chart that you see here, we asked at the very beginning of the survey, which if you've ever taken a survey, this is this nationally representative survey, it's kind of weird to get a first open-ended question, much less an open-ended question about what comes to mind when you think about the word equity. And we just got a fascinating set of responses. And so we gave actually folks 2 chances, because there are multiple definitions for equity, to say what first came to mind. And so just over half of respondents offered some sort of relevant response that showed us that they were familiar with the concept, kind of top of mind. And the other half offered other definitions, things like home equity or money, or said they didn't know. And so with this in mind, a reminder that as we're stepping outside of maybe our typical circles of communications, that just saying the word equity doesn't necessarily cue even the type of equity that we're talking about, much less the very kind of clear and specific definition that we really invite people to identify for themselves what they mean when they're talking about it. So in this next slide, here are some of the examples of the words that when we were coding them showed up, some of these core themes when people defined it relevant. You know, we didn't say whether it was a correct or incorrect definition, just trying to get a lay of the land of how people understand it. And so the language and ideas, you know, very similar to some of the things that you brought up here. Some of the 3 of the most common ideas that we saw come up: equality, same, fairness. And here are some of the ways that we saw people describe those ideas. Things like equal opportunity, equal access, treated the same opportunities, fair and impartial, some of the things, again, that are coming up here. But I want to bring up a couple of the challenges, right? Our goal in communications is both to understand our audiences, to understand how they're thinking about things, what they understand, and what they feel about the issues that we're working on. We also don't necessarily just want to use the language they're using, but be aware of how they're thinking about it, so that we can help educate, re-educate, open people's eyes. And so a couple of things to point out here. First, people don't have a consistent definition of equity. Even those who are familiar with the idea, and even Lumina grantees, for example, across the board, define it, use different words and concepts to talk about it. Some wrote about race, some wrote about gender, some wrote about fair access, other about fair outcomes. And second, this isn't necessarily the way we want people to be defining equity. Talking about opportunity is a really common word and theme, and well understood and accepted theme in communicating about equity. We also know that equity can mean so much more than just giving people equal opportunity. And I want to point out some of these definitions that you brought up. So Patrick, not having the equal number of tools, but the correct tools, right? So we're not just talking about access to opportunity, but actually what are those actions that we're taking? What are we offering? What are the tools and resources? And what are the outcomes? And so at the end of the day, and really will encourage you to check out some of the resources that we've made available on Lumina's website, but thinking about equity in terms of opportunity and that people don't have equal opportunity. So starting with that frame, the need for action and what specifically that action is. And so making sure that anytime we're talking about equity, that we don't just stop at that access conversation, but we're talking about equity means these actions and equity means these outcomes. What does it mean? How does it change the life experience, the day-to-day experience of the people that we're really working to support? And so I would really encourage you to think about those, access to opportunity, and it's not equal, actions and outcomes. Anytime, you're thinking about internally what equity means to your own organization or your work, and that you don't kind of fall into a communications trap of getting stuck in one of these definitions that actually isn't as thoughtful or meaningful as you intend. So this next slide, you can see some of the resources. If you go to Lumina's website, it's kind of a second level drop down of talking equity. So we have a resource that we developed, this how should I talk about race? Who are we to tell you? But to help better understand who you are and individuals' own awareness, comfort in talking about race and racial equity, and audiences. And with that, what are some of the communications tips to be thinking about? We also have a wealth of resources, including this national survey that we did. I just shared a tiny bit of this attitudes and message testing research, but all of that is available to dig in. Definitely invite you to take a look, ask questions, follow up with us after. But just as a groundwork, knowing that this is, it's always been important. It's even more important to have a really clear definition so that you're not letting somebody else define it for you. So I'll pause there. If there are any questions with that, there's a lot to say here. And so I want to make sure that we really, don't spend all this time here, but it's going to be woven into the work we do going forward. So any thoughts or questions? That's great. Heidi will speak a little bit more to metaphors and how to think about them, but there's some really cool tools about what are some of these core metaphors that we tend to go to, and simplicity is part of it, but it's more how do we use all parts of our brain. So yeah, take a look at this. And I now want to turn to you all to do a fun exercise. I think that you have been warned, encouraged to have some sort of sheet of paper in front of you. And so we are going to ask you to draw a picture. So one way to help audiences better understand these big, complicated ideas is to help visualize what it looks like. And so feel free to take this exercise with equity in mind or more broadly. But we do this to activate different parts of our brains when we're thinking. And so our information processing is largely visual, actually. We picture things and then put words to them. And so we like to start with this visual exercise to get to vision state, right? This is why vision statements exist, because we're motivated to create something that we can see. And so that's where we start. So as we want to help shape that for you, I want you to think about, what is this broad goal? Where is your community now as you think about your work and however you want to kind of scope that? Draw a picture on the left side. I don't actually know which shows up for left for you. On the left side of your sheet of paper, a picture of your community as it currently is. And then on the right side, a picture of your community, what it will look like when you've achieved your impact, when you're successful. So you don't have to be Picasso. This is no extra points for beautiful drawings, but it's always fun to see what folks have. Take a few minutes and draw, and we'll share and get some examples when you do. I want to speak to Marie's comment or question in the chat a little bit more. She asks, does it work to say what equity is not, like it's not equality, or does it make it more confusing? One of the things to think about when you're trying to define these abstract terms is it's often easier to describe and define something by what it does rather than what it is, because then we almost get stuck in more words and language gobbledygook when we're in this like field of jargon. And so being able to draw a picture, to really look and think about what something does, what does it accomplish, how does it work, will sometimes allow us to kind of get out of that place of being stuck when we're talking about something that's pretty complicated. Looks like folks are taking a couple more minutes. You are welcome to drop your drawings in the chat if you would like. We'll also ask a few folks to share. And Carlos, if you want to stop screen sharing, then we can see folks' faces. Donnie, I'm not sure how others are doing it, but if you probably take a picture on your phone, and that must be how you did it, and then dropped it in if you've got the app. Otherwise, we can just hold it up. All right. Oh my gosh, look at these great pictures.
Yeah,
The background doesn't work.
Would anybody like to explain their drawing? If you do, maybe use the raised hand option for Zoom, and we can call you out. Or just write in the chat if you'd like to show and explain your drawing.
Volunteers.
We have Kate.
Yes.
Oh, I think you have to, there we go.
Good morning, everybody. So good to see all these faces. It's hard to see my picture, but basically over here, I have our 5 counties. Sorry, everyone, not to scale. And on this side, I have this kind of arrows coming in, like policy comes at us and research comes at us and best practice comes at us and experts tell us what to do. And there's sort of this judgment of what rural is. And then with the work of North State Together and all your counties, and then what we hope to do with scale, the arrows are reversed where the research is going out that we're sharing with others, and best practices for rural going out to share with others. And the expertise is within and going out instead of always people on the outside always kind of telling us what to do. So arrows and boxes, that's about the extent of my art.
Yeah. I'm wondering, where would you place the people in that picture?
Well, each county is coming up with the solutions that are most relevant to their own experiences and the populations that they serve. Mm-hmm. And so I think North State Together and then Scale will try to capture that, to share it and build on it. But it all starts with the people on the ground in each county and each community.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think we'll have Heidi.
Happy to share. Hello, everybody. So this is my amazing drawing. Preschool teacher for years, still can't draw very well. And on this side, or right on a whiteboard, but on this side, which I think is reversed, but the current side is education, businesses, what else did I write down there? Medical, church and other groups, like all, right now I think we all have worked for a long time and are kind of thinking about children and pointing there. But over here in my dream is that we're not all just kind of separately thinking, but we're deeply integrated with each other. So that's representing the circles, and that they're not just pointing to children, but they're pointing to children and families, mm-hmm. and that they're pointing to each other. And then my little bubbles there are that in everything all these groups do, mm-hmm. they are constantly speaking the power of children and families. And then there's other bubbles that show the pride for community. Because those things to me are really, really powerful, that I want us to feel proud. And then I also want us to constantly be thinking about what we're doing, how it affects children and families.
No, yeah, those are really powerful themes, especially the theme of belonging can be especially a good motivator to motivate others to support and do the work of to build the type of community that we all want to live in. Yeah. Okay. Kathy?
Hi. So I first didn't realize I was going after Heidi, so that's not really fair. But Heidi, you look great this morning. Nice to see you two up close, Kate. I didn't do this the right way, so mine's more this way. But I'm stealing from a visual that I always think about with this work, and that's of, you know, all of the, so many people sort of, or children, you name it, falling into that stream and going down, and we're plucking them out of the streams, and they more and more are falling in, and you know, we're creating systems that help pluck them out of the streams the best we can, but we're not getting to the root cause, which is up here. What the heck is going on, you know? So, and then I tend to feel sort of isolated too. I think there's groups doing, there's still separation. So throughout the county itself, there's still pockets, you know, of separation, isolation, things like that. But then after getting more of, you know, the connected, the overlapping, the getting on the same page together, and then, you know, the water being a little bit more clear and not having so much of, you know, the crisis intervention, but the actual not having them fall in the first place.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Tanja. I don't think we can hear you. Is it just me?
Is that better?
Yes.
No. Okay. Oh, good. Hey, hold on. So I drew a picture. I live in Modoc County, and I know Nicole's on here too. I haven't looked at your picture yet. So Nicole, you have to comment on this. Let's see if I can. This is my current situation. And so we have more cows than people. So lots of ranching, and this idea of, I put the cowboy hat because it's more of that individualism and ruggedness, like I can do it myself, I don't need help. But that also means that I'm not always looking out for other people and connecting with other people. So it's like about me and my family, and you know, if you're poor, you need help, that's your own fault and your own issue. We have a low cost of living, so lots of people retire here. Our average farmer is 65. In the nation, they're 55, so we have an older population. Lots of empty stores on Main Street. Pretty solid group of locally grown. Our farmers market, Modoc Food Hub is a strength, I think. And then I kind of touching on what Heidi said, we have this idea, there's no college in our county, there's no jobs, this myth that all young people have to leave to be successful. And I put down a hashtag all trash, which is what my high school students tell me is on Snapchat, that they think it's funny, and they have pictures of trashy people in Alturas and each other, and it's a pretty awful thing. I think it's awful. That's not something I want to identify with. So in my dream, we would change that hashtag to all star, and post good things about our community, and have things that we're proud of, that pride idea, you know, and where we live, and that all of these people that are kind of individualistic and rugged, they do care about community, and I want them to connect with each other and diversify. So right now we have a lot of meat cows, which that industry is not controlled locally. And so wouldn't it be great if we could diversify into milk and cheese, and have more vegetables, and do more things. For example, I learned that our Surprise Valley school imports their beef for school lunches from Australia. And we have thousands of cows here right next to the school. You can see them from the playground, and that's crazy to me. So all the houses are full. There's families and young people. The businesses are full. We can support our own living wages, social mobility. I didn't write down Zoomtown, but that's kind of a concept that's been floating around here, because we actually have some decent internet in parts of our county, and that there would be pathways for people, not just young people, but all people. We have a high group of adults without diplomas, things like that, that they would still be able to connect back and reach that living wage, high demand job thing. So that's what I got.
That is awesome. You touched on a lot of points that we're going to be covering in our next section of the presentation, where we're going to be talking about narratives. And let me just share my screen again, 1 second.
Yeah, there's some themes that just would lift up that I was hearing from you all around connection and relationship, integration across counties, integration within a broader system, sense of power and ownership within communities. That seems like it's really important in showing up in these different pictures. Sense of pride, also things to celebrate. Belonging, more with that connection and relationship sense, and pathways for all people, creating this sense of opportunity for people, that they can feel like these are places that they really can tap into their aspirations, and this is a place that can help and support and hold that.
Yeah, and in your drawings, all of you were already talking about in narratives. You were showing us what are the protagonists of the story that you want to share, and what are the challenges that they need to overcome, and what are the goals that they're working for. And you also talked about harmful narratives. Tanja, you mentioned the common narrative about the self-sufficiency, of commonly known like pulling yourself up at your bootstraps. That's very harmful to a lot of like the communities that I imagine a lot of you work with. So we're going to be reviewing in this next section what are narratives, what are ways to sort of what are positive narratives that activate positive frames in people's minds. We've reviewed the aspirational communication model. You've literally now drawn your vision for what is the work that you're doing. So now we're going to be working on crafting the words that will form that aspirational narrative. First thing that we want to learn is to frame it first. The first thing you say about a topic influences all of the perceptions and judgments that follow. Framing can be helpful, but only if used correctly. The first thing you said about a topic is going to make the judgment for every single word that follows. So they activate either positive or negative associations that people have with a subject. It can create support, or it can distance audiences from your messages. So something we'll be working through in some of these exercises is to be careful to not use those words or phrases that activate negative frames in people's minds. And we'll give you a few examples of those. First, we just want to review what it is that we mean by narrative. We've talked about it a lot since the beginning. This is our narrative framework that we use at Hattaway Communication. As you can see, it is a very simple structure that helps us organize messages into a coherent structure that people can easily understand, and that conveys all of the elements of the aspirational model you saw. The most basic narrative structure, if you think about any story, always involves a protagonist that is trying to reach a meaningful goal, but who has to overcome obstacles along the way. If you think most of the movies you've seen this structure. If you think about any Disney movie like Moana, Harry Potter, Star Wars, they follow this same structure. As our narrative structure shows, you want to put your audience in the role of the protagonist, that's the people, and that person or those people, they're working towards a goal. What are the goals? That's the aspirations. But they have obstacles that they have to face along the way. Those are the problems. And the solutions, that's you. That's the policy, your program, whatever is going to help carry those people to overcome the problems and the obstacles they're facing so they can reach their goal. So if you do this, people will see how your work is relevant to what's meaningful in their lives. So we're going to help you develop a message about each of these elements, a message about the people, a message about their aspirations, their goals, a message about the problem, and a message about the solution. And then we're going to help you find narrative cohesion between all those elements to produce a short 1-minute message that tells a very simple story to others of what it is that you're working for, who you're helping with your work, and what are the solutions that you're bringing to the table. One thing to keep in mind for the rest of the session, we hear a lot about narrative and storytelling in communications. We use these words differently. When we say narrative, we mean this overarching framework that is literally used to frame stories. And stories are about very individual people in specific situations that puts them within a larger context. So this is what we're going to be developing during this session. What's that larger context that all of the stories that you can share about your work are going to live in? To give you an example of how this narrative framework can be applied and how we've used it with other clients in the past, we're going to first review an example that we did with the Ford Foundation. They came to us at Hattaway many years ago with a challenge. Their anti-poverty programs were trying to reframe how people view welfare programs. Now, if you think about welfare, the word just welfare, that's a word that activates a lot of negative associations in people's minds. if you worked in that issue, you've probably seen a lot of this very common negative narrative out there. You know, it's commonly framed as it's lazy people who don't want to work and their goal is to get something for nothing because there's a lack of initiative and work ethic. So the solution is to have welfare handouts for the programs. Now, all of us know that's not the actual case or the story to tell, and so did the Ford Foundation, but they had to find what are the right words to sort of combat this negative narrative and reframe the issue in people's minds. So in order to do that, we did a lot of research nationally through surveys, focus groups, to find what are the words that can motivate people to support a narrative that talks about anti-poverty programs. What we came up with was, when we talk about people, we talk about families who are working hard to get ahead. And their goal is to achieve financial security. And that for them means a job, home, education, retirement. Again, this is not only about painting the goal as they need money. No, we're talking about financial security. It's again, those higher aspirations and hopes that people have for their lives that we want to be appealing them to. But the problem is that many children don't get an equal start in life. Now, if we think about the problems of anti-government, of welfare programs, there's a lot of factors that come into that, but we want to explain it in simple terms that people can understand. And the solution is proven tools that offer the opportunity to learn, work, and save. Now, we think these are very few words in which we're explaining the goals for the Ford Foundation's cause and work that they do in government anti-poverty programs. And we can use these very few words to develop all kinds of messages for them. So a few examples of those messages that we develop with these words. This is a short elevator speech using the elements that we saw in the narrative. So we talk about a lot of kids don't get an equal start in life because their families struggle to just make ends meet. Government should offer hardworking families proven tools to help parents become more financially secure and save to send their kids to college so that their children have an opportunity to become successful, independent adults. This is a narrative framework in action. This is a quick elevator speech and has that overarching narrative that we came up with that actually proved to be very effective for these anti-poverty programs. As I mentioned, we did a national survey to test these messages. And when we presented welfare programs and this type of framing with these words, our message tested well over 70% in public support, which is a high number to get when we're talking about government programs. Again, this very short, concise narrative framework can be applied in a few different ways. It can also be used to make a longer 1-minute message. So we can talk about hardworking people across the country are striving to make a better life for themselves and their families, but they don't have the opportunity to achieve financial independence and long-term security. Many jobs don't pay enough to allow people to save money to go through emergencies, much less pay for education, buy a home, or put money away for retirement. And many policies benefit those who need help the least, while overlooking people who start out in life with less opportunity, lose their jobs in tough economic times, or face other obstacles to financial security. Government can offer proven tools that help everyone to save and invest for the future. The goal of having a narrative frame is that it's not static, but it can be applied to many different communications, but it's just framing all of your communications in the same themes. Now, there are some words here that are not in the narrative framework because it's not that we're trying to make you all find the set of 150 words that you're gonna have to memorize and repeat every time you talk about your programs. What we're gonna find is what are those overarching themes that should be carried out through all of the communications. So it's not about repeating the same message every time. It's that you have a framework that you can use across a wide range of communications. So there's another format how we can use those elements in the narrative framework, this 1-minute message. So this is what we're gonna help you achieve. And now we're gonna go through every single element in the narrative framework. We're gonna start with people, then goals, problems, solutions, and try to come up first with short messages for each of those elements before we go into building what would be your 1-minute message. So first, we're gonna, I wanna pause there first before we go into the people and see if any folks have questions. Okay. So if folks don't have questions, we're gonna start first.
Carlos, can I, this is Karen Potts from Siskiyou. I'm wondering if when you were doing your work around this messaging, were families involved in pulling together the messaging,
Yes,
these messages?
we tested, for context, this messaging was done around 6-7 years ago. So a lot of the social context changes between those times, but we tested it nationally in representative surveys, as well as did focus groups across the country. But these messages
After the design or as part of the design?
As part of the design. And these messages are intended for a lot of the Ford Foundation teams to use with their own audiences. But we also wanted to make sure that some of these are words that some of the families would use to describe themselves or the goals that they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So that concept of engaging families and assuring that they have equal part at the table as we do this work is critical.
Yeah.
Right? As we put together messaging on behalf of them in this situation is critical.
Yeah, 100%, because we want to understand what motivates them, because it has to be a message that is authentic to them. Otherwise, it's just going to sound like what we commonly see as buzzwords or jargon from some nonprofits or foundations that you hear that they're working with families, when you hear them talk about vulnerable families and the problems, where we, in our theory, what we do is try to frame them in aspirational terms so they see themselves reflecting that message, and the policymakers or program staff who are using this message can speak to those aspirations in authentic ways.
I think that's a great point, Karen, that you bring up of the process of all of this is, when we're working on a full message development project, it's all rooted in audience research, because if we're trying to get someone to do something, right, to change their behaviors, to take a class, to whatever it might be, we have to start with them. And so what we're doing right now is really what is at the core of the way that you think about your work that can give you something to go and play with and test and see, does this resonate? How does this feel in practice? It should be as authentic for you as it is for your audience. And so this is a starting place to figure out where are you in understanding the broader narrative.
Anybody else? Okay, we're going to start with the first element of our narrative framework, which is people. And that's perfect because the number one rule of aspirational communication is to put people in the picture. It is the most critical piece of the puzzle. Now, it sounds simple, put people in the picture, because it helps others see themselves in your narrative, but you would be amazed at the number of big nonprofits or foundations or others who work in these spaces. You go to their website, you read their mission, and there's very little language about who does their work ultimately serve. So we always need to remember who is our protagonist in our story and how can we talk about them. Now, I'm going to show you an example that illustrates the utmost importance of why it's important to put your protagonist in the story. Now, this is a quote from Barack Obama, and Barack Obama says, "We don't need a weakened government, but a strong government that would take responsibility for the rights of the individual and care for the society as a whole." Now, if you like Obama, you'll probably find yourself reading this and probably agreeing with him. You mostly have an open mind to this idea about strong government that protects the rights of the individual and caring for society at large. The problem is Obama didn't say this. This guy did. Now, probably seeing a lot of you maybe shocked, maybe laugh at it, and notice your reaction to that revelation. If you're not a Putin fan, you have a very different sense of this same quote. And these are the exact same words that were presented by Obama, but now you're just seeing them through a different messenger. And this is because the messenger matters. And this is due to their liking heuristic. Our judgments are more influenced by liking or disliking than by reasoning. Our judgments about people and their ideas and actions are influenced first and foremost by our feelings towards that person. So when we have positive feelings about the source of an idea, we're much more likely to trust it and believe it and think it's a smart idea. So this has a lot of implications for the communication that we want to do. The messenger matters. So who you put in the picture is very important. How are you going to describe them? Who are they like as a person? Is going to have a lot of influence whether people are going to like what you have to say about your own story. So we want to put a likable human face to the messages that we're sharing and to the human face to your organization. Too many organizations hide their people behind all of the talk between programs and products that we forget who's the protagonist, who's sharing our message. Another way to think about this is through deficit and asset framing. Now, I'm gonna explain deficit framing is defining people by their problems, ignoring their contributions, then remediating them to be less burdens on society. So an example of what deficit framing language is if an organization would say, we help at-risk kids in high crime neighborhoods to stay on track and graduate in order to avoid becoming negative statistics. Now, deficit framing encourages other, it exacerbates social distancing, and it just creates that othering feeling that we sometimes get when we read a message. The opposite of this is asset framing. And this is what we encourage organizations to do. Asset framing is a defining of people by their aspirations and contributions, then acknowledges the challenges which extend beyond them and investing in them for continued benefit to society. So instead of saying we help at-risk kids, we can say we help students who are hungry for an education to learn and achieve the goals that they set for themselves. These are two messages that are intending to share sort of the same overall goal, but they are approached in very different ways and can have very different reactions to the messages. What's most important is to think about the audience that your work ultimately sells. How do you think they would feel if they read those messages that you're sharing about them? If we put them side to side here, we help at-risk kids, or we help students who are hungry for an education. And yes, I just saw the message by Anna, framing language, such a powerful tool, and that's just correct. The way that I also like to explain it to others is to think about the neighborhood that you grew up in, the one you spent most of your childhood. Now imagine somebody else talking about the neighborhood and the people that you grew up with and the people that still live there. How would you like for others to be talking about those people that you grew up with? Is it going to be in deficit for terms, describing them by the problems or obstacles they face? Or is it more about their achievement and aspirations for their lives? Now, this doesn't mean that we have to ignore the obstacles that people face, because there is a part of our message that has to address those in order for it to be motivating. I think this is asking to people to not lead with the obstacles that people face or not describe them by them, because people are more than the challenges that they face. It's sort of like, it's a delicate balance between both of acknowledging their aspirations and hopes and also acknowledging what are the obstacles that they're facing. So just to bring it home, similarity. We're more likely to like people who are similar to us in some way. So when you're describing the protagonist in your message, you have to think about some way of describing them that makes them others either like them or admire them. So what are descriptions, words that you can use to do that? If we think back to the example that we reviewed at the top of this section, when we used for Ford, we didn't talk about vulnerable families. We didn't talk about poor people in low crime neighborhoods. We talked about families that are working hard to get ahead. That's a phrasing that most people can either like or relate to, because it speaks to people's aspirations and motivations. So we want you to think of your own and write down what are some affirming words or phrases that describe the people involved in your cause. So take a few minutes to write it down, and then we'll ask folks to share in the chat and save. And we're going to do this for every element in the framework. So make sure to save it, because when we come to the 1 minute message, we'll use a lot of these elements. And I also want to open it up to questions for this part of the framework.
I just, this is Karen again. I had to smile and laugh because I grew up in the world of Putin in the former Soviet Union around the same time as he did, or close to it. And so it's so true, when I hear, our experiences were very different, and some may consider growing up in communist Russia as a horrible thing. And as I've lived here, at times it may seem horrible, but there's just something powerful about being in a place where people are at the center of helping people. In our case, government was not who you wanted to help you. So it's how we view things is
Yeah.
where we have to start
Yeah.
in working with communities.
No, that's so important to remember that what are the perspectives that your audiences have, and make sure that the words or protagonists you're using, what kind of narratives is that going to activate in their heads? So I think that's a very important thing to bring up. Remember the experiences and the lives that other people have as you're crafting these messages. Okay, would anybody like to share? What are some affirming words that describe the people and their cause? How would you describe the people that you work with, that your work ultimately benefits, the ones that are involved in your cause? Please share in the chat. So we have caring, creative, scrappy, invested, committed, hardworking. We also have here a different approach with Susan. In the North State, our people build, care, innovate, and have local rural pride. I think that's a really powerful message. Because you have, you mentioned caring, you mentioned having pride, belonging. Those are very powerful themes and ideas.
And you probably are starting to see that these are probably ways you would describe yourselves in your own work. And there's a lot of power in that. Speaking in language and with ideas that mirror how you show up in the world.
So from George, hardworking, lifelong learners, caring, community builders. They're all powerful, and they can also apply to many audiences, because that's something that we've heard others struggle, the ones from people that work in the education space, because they can sometimes be like, when we think about students, a lot of people would think like, oh, we're talking about young people. No, there's a lot of like adult learners or other people that are short-term learners. So talking about this like lifelong learners is a really way to like capture all the different people that are part of your narrative, and also very clearly explain what it is that they're doing with their life, which is learning or community builders or community. Mm-hmm. We have from Tekla, she said, resilient, solution seekers, job seekers, open to mentorship and mentoring. I think these are also really good ideas, branding people, so not only describe them by their students, their teachers, their education administration, but as solution seekers or job seekers. It's also a really smart approach to sort of have a catch-all phrases and words for who's part of your narrative, and framing them in using positive framing.
These are also really active words, you will notice, right? These are people doing a thing, like they're taking action. They're just not, they're not passively receiving support. That's not what the work that you do is about. And so starting out with people that you are working to support and help and equip and empower by shining the light on the work that they are doing, the work and the energy and the actions that they are taking is a really empowering place to start.
By Karen, they are an asset and they have assets. I think that's also a good way to frame it of people are bringing something to the table and we can learn from them as well. Okay, these are all good ideas to make sure to keep them with you as we start moving towards the different elements, as we'll use these ideas to build your 1-minute message. So like in the message for the Ford Foundation, they talk about hardworking families. In your own message, you will also describe them, whoever it is. If it's students, you can describe them. We work with solution seekers, lifelong learners who are passionate about gaining an education or something along those lines. We're going to move now to the next element of our narrative, which is goals. And when we talk about goals, we talk about authentic aspirations. Authentic aspirations are the ideas about the kind of person you truly want to live, you truly want to be, the life you want to live, and the world you want to live in. So our recommendation when talking about goals is to aim high. When you're talking about the goals, you're talking about aspiration. What gets you out of bed every morning? What drives you? Appeal to authentic aspirations. So goals have to can speak to motivations on multiple levels. They can speak about survival, security, belonging. We've heard a lot about this throughout the session. Achievement, contribution. So think about the people in your narrative, those that your work serves. What are the goals that they're working towards? How do those relate to all the other different audiences that you have? So one way to think about that is also through visuals. So aspirations come in many forms. They can be about education, getting a job and contributing back to your community, or it can also be about helping others. These are just different ways that we can visualize and think about what goals and what motivates people. So a reminder, people are motivated to pursue goals that reflect their authentic aspirations. In other words, you can connect and motivate people to support your cause when they believe your goals and the goals that they're aligned. Think back to the example that we saw from the Ford Foundation. We didn't say families are working hard to get ahead and their goal is that they need money. We talked about financial security. That's a high aiming goal. And that's something that we can all relate to. Now, it looks very different if we think about it individually. The way I think about financial security might be very different from what others in this workshop do, but it can generally all have a sense of what that looks like. It can mean a job, home, education, retirement. So we want to both aim high, financial security, and then just paint a picture to others of what it is that they look like, of what it is that goal looks like. So again, and I just saw, we want you all to think about what are the authentic aspirations of your audience and just jot down a few ideas. And if you have questions, drop it in the chat. I have a question from Kathy. Can we talk about this as it pertains to young adults? Sure, Kathy, would you mind maybe turning on your mic so I can just understand a little bit more about who are you working with and sort of what do you think their goals are?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, both in my work with Expect More and in workforce development, that 18 to 24-year-old group is often, for us, especially right now, sort of missing in action. And that's been the question, is how do you engage? How do you keep their attention? What is it right now that group wants for themselves that
what have you learned?
Where we can start that discussion. I think it's a really difficult one. I've been on something for the last 3 days, and we're talking from Sacramento to LA to you name it, DC. They're, this age group is super hard right now for engagement. So I'm all ears on, figuring that out.
Yeah, I would be curious to ask you, what have you learned about through this work? What ideas have you heard from them on what it is that they're looking for? And it can be very functional. It can just be like, I just want a job, or what are you hearing out there?
It's very much something quick and instant, and our process tends to be fairly slow. They're sort of transient and hard to pin down. They move around, or they miss appointments, or they don't respond to phone calls. So it's text if you can get them that way. They need a job. They need a job quickly. A lot of times they're couch surfing. They're not willing to give up some of their habits that would help with some of the goals that they're talking about. So there's a lot of escapism, I think, a lot of let me just be with my friends and play some video games and smoke some pot, or, you know, I just want to escape everything that's going on right now. So how do we, and I know how intimidating it is to step into some of these programs or commit to something that seems beyond, you know, seems a long time.
Yeah.
When we talk pre-apprenticeship, when we talk going back to school, when we talk those things, I'm sure the commitment piece seems overwhelming, but, you know, what is just a baby step? What is something that, you know, you can plant that seed that creates the hope or the excitement or the bigger picture?
Yeah. No, these are all big questions. And I think for a narrative like that, it's important to first acknowledge what it is a lot of young people are going through in the country right now. You know, they're going through virtual classes. Finding a job right now, it's hard. So it's I think, a mix of acknowledging of things are hard right now, and we acknowledge that, but we want to help you take that first step into your journey. So what do you think would motivate them? Is it about taking that first step into the journey? Is it about building their future? You know that audience. What is it that you think they want? I know it's hard to think about them in long term because, as you say, they're now very short-term focused. But when we think about aspirations, what is it you think about what would motivate them to take that first step? And it can even just be that kind of language, like, we want to help you take the first step into the journey of building your own future. And if others have ideas, also please feel to drop it into the chat. We heard from Tanja, social connection or belonging. Or yeah, another one that generally resonates a lot is national security, self-sufficiency.
Some of the research that we've done and other work with young people of all ages, freedom comes up over and over again. You know, freedom to do what they want, to make their own choices. And so how do you frame the work that you do as an opportunity to get more freedom? You know, financial freedom is certainly one of them. How does it allow them to make their own choices and not be burdened by somebody else telling them what to do? That's, again, just a theme that comes up a lot. And we can talk about this with the problem too, as well, of if the aspirational space is really tapping in a little bit to that vision of what is the life actually that I'm trying to lead, and then breaking down the problem to be super specific about what is the specific thing that you're dealing with right now. And if it's like filling out forms is really hard, or I, you know, missed my appointment and I'd rather do this other thing. That's where you can set up your specific solution to directly respond to the problem. And so at this point of kind of helping people see themselves and what they're trying to, you know, whether they put the words to it or not, what they're working toward, set this broader vision, and then you can focus in on the specific problem. And yeah, this is a space of folks to learn from each other. So definitely jump in. This is really great, the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Patrick mentioned a really good point of there is a belief and confidence in the self that is missing. They may even see a vision of where they want to go, but have difficulty committing to the process out of fear of it not working out. It can also be important to acknowledge, of being like, hey, figuring out where to go next is hard, but this is what we're here to do with you, and figure out how we can take you to that next step that eventually leads to the kind of life that you want to be living.
And your question just brings up we haven't talked about this a ton. I'm curious, Carlos, if you have thoughts on here, but you know, we're in this, in a moment, whatever that means, like the world is really stressful. And I think there's a beauty and an importance of acknowledging that. So speaking a little bit more to Carlos, what you were saying is just like, yeah, this is hard and complicated and we don't have the answers either. And so just honoring you know, definitely not trying to set this up as these aspirational communications that are to create some sort of artificial vision or possibility, but to help set the groundwork, while also being really clear that this isn't easy, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not supposed to be. I definitely don't. I'm glad that I am not a student right now.
It's funny, the whole idea of adulting. I have a 24-year-old right now, and she's been independent. She's back home right now, but just they joke about it, but they're serious when they say, I really don't want to be adulting. I don't want to make these decisions. I don't want to have to step up to the plate. It's funny because, I think that for those of us who are older, we never thought there was some line you crossed. We were so anxious to get a car, to get an apartment, to get a job, to get out. I don't know if, we've just been such an amazing environment for some of these kids that the idea of having to take some of those steps just doesn't appeal. And then there's some kids who are forced, that they're in transitional foster care, they have an apartment, all the other kids in their situation are hanging out with them, and that becomes their little mini family. And then leaving that to go back out into the community and do something is also sort of uncomfortable. But I think we have a lot of that age group just thinking this adulting thing really is, what's the shining light on the adulting scenario,
I don't know. You got any answers for me? This is great. I think.
I have a,
Please go ahead.
Oh no, I think the most fascinating thing is they just have so much to offer and so much brilliance in them if we just take the time to listen to them, regardless of their circumstances. We have a project with that we work with, what the society would see as difficult youth or, at risk or any of those things. But, I'm sure Mary and others who work with youth know that if we just pause and really go beyond their current circumstances, they are amazing resources for us. They can be the guide, and we can be the resource to them to the kind of aspirations that that they have, and we can offer them to be successful.
I think that actually brings really thoughtfully to then how do we actually talk about the problem in a way that acknowledges the real problems that are getting in the way of these aspirational goals, and also not making them so big and overwhelming as to be demotivating, because that can be one of the biggest challenges of talking about the problem is there's a lot of them, and they can be big and scary and overwhelming. And so while being honest with it, also scaling it to whatever conversation you're having. And so again, thinking about that visual, the problem that stands in the way of people getting to their goals, and just as a preview to the solution, remember, we're thinking about the problem, setting it up so that your work and your partnerships are the solution. And so sometimes it's helpful to almost work backwards when you say, what is the solution that I'm trying to share? Now, how do I need to set up the problem? And so I also want to acknowledge in the education space, it's so easy to perpetuate messages that put the burden on students or parents or teachers rather than the problem that actually you're trying to solve, right? You're not trying to fix the student. You're trying to fix policies and practices or beliefs that need to change. And so keeping that in mind, that, while we're not going to be talking, or, we'll be making sure that we're speaking about the people that we're supporting in really aspirational ways, we set them up in a really positive light and then speak to the problem that is standing in the way. And so some places to start when thinking about problems is to define causes and consequences. Because to feel motivated to act and to understand the role that you play, people need to, well, first be aware of the problem. They need to care about it and believe change is possible. If you're thinking about a student who, in these cases, the problems may be very obvious. If you're talking to a policymaker, maybe not so much. You need to make the problem clear and specific. Oftentimes just one data point does it, really focused. Open, again, with using emotional connections to get them to care about it. And then again, not making it so big as to be impossible to solve, to really believe that change is possible. So making sure, again, to separate causes and consequences. So what is causing the problem? As much as you can name a villain, do it. That isn't always appropriate in all communications or conversations, but it's helpful to know for yourself what actually is causing this problem. And then what are the consequences? How does it actually show up in people's lives? And that's where we speak to the actual lived experience of students or families, of where it's getting in the way, again, of what they're trying to achieve. So here's an insight from that forward work that Carlos has been talking about. People's perceptions on this point of whether it is lack of effort or lack of access to opportunity that is responsible for a person being poor. This sort of insight is helpful for us to know, because it gives us an opportunity to frame the problem and focus it on the system. This is an example of when we have multiple meta-narratives in our mind of just how the world works, that if you're going back to the bootstraps, these bootstraps meta-narratives, if you're not successful, it's because you're not working hard enough. That is an American narrative. It is also an American narrative that lack of access to opportunity is a real challenge, and we can help overcome that. And so what your messages can do is activate the right narrative, right? Start from a space where you're focusing the energy and the attention about the problem on the real problem, and making it super explicit. So here's how it shows up in that narrative. A lot of kids don't get an equal start in life because their families struggle just to make ends meet. So this sets us up for the solution, again, how we frame this lack of opportunity. You see equal start. That is a metaphor. We've mentioned metaphors earlier, came up in the chat a bit, but you can really see this in your mind's eye. You can picture kids lining up at a starting line. And this is a really common communications tool. Obviously, we learned about metaphors in second grade or whenever we did. You probably know better than me. But it's a common way that people make sense of the world. And so in this case, kids at a starting line is a physical metaphor. And there's something really interesting about physical metaphors, because a lot of different parts of your brain light up when you hear a physical metaphor. The language center of your brain lights up because you're understanding words. You can picture kids, the visual center of your brain lights up because there's action, because there's actual physical action. The part of your brain that's responsible for motor activity is also awakened. And so it gets a wider part of your brain involved that actually gets you to pay more attention and care about it more. And so that's just a little bit of the detail why metaphors, and physical metaphors specifically, can be so powerful, especially, again, when we're talking about some of these complicated, serious issues that maybe words otherwise aren't quite cutting it. So here it shows up in the narrative. Again, many children don't get an equal start in life. And so as much as possible, speaking to the specific reasons for that and pointing that out in the deeper narrative, but recognizing that there is a solution to overcome that. So I'm going to pause there as we get to the exercise. So you can start to think about this, add it to the chat, and of course questions. But what is the cause of the problem that you're trying to solve? Obviously trying to think about that first. What is the cause, and what are the consequences for the people that you serve? I imagine a lot of you are thinking about systems. We do a lot of work with organizations trying to tackle systems level problems because that's where, again, you go upstream. And so one of the things that has been really helpful for me in defining systems is getting specific about them. You know, we can talk about system change all we want, but actually what does it mean and how does it show up in people's lives? And so thinking about what are, and this is the shorthand I use, policies, practices, and beliefs. Like, what are the policies? Name the policies, be as specific as you can. What are the practices? What are the ways that it's showing up day-to-day life, maybe in the classroom, maybe at the, you know, when somebody's going through a hiring process? And what are the beliefs? What are those attitudes that people are bringing that you can help transform? Yep, and I see a lot of this conversation about consequences, like how does this show up in people's lives? Low achievement scores, low support, feeling a school isn't for them. I really like that visceral experience makes it very real to me. All of these needs. And so as much as you can, push yourself. What is it? So why is that the case? If this is the consequence, what is making it happen? Why is this showing up like this? Is it because we have policies that don't address certain needs further upstream? What are those policies? This is oftentimes one of the hardest parts of working on the narratives. And again, it's sometimes helpful to think about your solution and then work backwards. But again, making sure that a narrative doesn't just have the consequences, because oftentimes if you just speak to the consequences, if you're just talking about, say, gaps language or like data that talk about achievement gaps, it can be interpreted like you're blaming the student, like you're blaming the teacher, like you're blaming all the people that you don't want to blame. These are because they're not actually the ones responsible, but they are living the consequences of the things that you're trying to fix. And so finding those opportunities to really point to the cause. Yeah, and I think starting to get to some of these visions and, you know, future state is really great. I actually want to point, George, you bring up something that's really interesting, showing examples of kids who did not have the best home life or opportunities, became amazing people, building resilience and toughness. And I know we see these stories that kind of open our hearts and make us feel so kind of excited and proud. And again, coming back to that idea of resilience, there's also a challenge in stories like these, making it feel, perpetuating again some of these bootstraps narratives where if that person was able to do it, why can't all of these other students? And so making sure that when we tell those examples of stories, that we're telling how they overcame that work or that challenge. How did they overcome it? Not just because they put their head down, but because they had resources and support and the loving teacher or whatever it is that really speaks to the need that you're trying to transform, which is why we think about strategic stories being such an important part of the narrative, because they build out a really specific example of the overarching narrative that we're talking about now. So just, again, these stories can be so impactful, and just making sure that we're not accidentally perpetuating things that we don't want to. This is great. Any thoughts or questions? All right. We'll start to put this all together very soon, but we are not solutions, which is where you come in. You, your organization, the policy that you might have in mind that you're trying to fix, or some work that you're trying to accomplish, that is the solution. You are the solution that is helping people overcome that problem that we're just starting to discuss. And so you want the problem and solution to be intuitive in the way that they connect it. And so this is, you know, sort of a goofy example, but if baseball team scores the fewest runs and based, you know, on like the season last year, we came in last place, you know, our solution is going to get a new pitching staff. What? No, your solution needs to be directly solving the problem that you have. And so to do that, after making, you know, thinking about that intuitive connection, be specific about what your solution is, and then understand the specific benefits to the people. Yeah. And George, I wanted to point out, yeah, I love sharing here. Someone believed in them, a system came on to encourage them, opportunities, choices, but they needed something to grasp onto. I think that's so right when we're telling these stories, to really lift up, because that's where the change happens, right? As we communicate for impact, to point people, to kind of lead them to that, the need for all of those critical relationships and the environment in which they can thrive. Excellent. So, specific solutions. Once you're specific about the problem that stands in the way, you can be specific in identifying your solution. And again, as I mentioned, intuitive. So here's how it shows up in the Ford Foundation message. And so as we saw the problem setting up as families struggle just to make ends meet, the government should offer struggling families proven tools to help parents become more financially secure. Save, and what can they do? What are the benefits of that? Save to send their kids to college so that their children have the opportunity to become successful, independent adults, things that we all would hope for. Great. And as I've mentioned, that specific solutions, building on that, what are the benefits? You're probably in situations where you're talking to audiences that may not be directly receiving the support that you are working to provide. And so thinking about what is the broader benefit to society about what you do. And so here's the example of where it shows up in that narrative. It's not just about people having access to those proven tools and being able to make that life for themselves, but it's this acknowledgement that middle-class Americans are the engine of our economy. To get the economy moving again, it makes sense for the government to offer those tools to enter the middle class, achieve financial security. So this, again, lifting certain people out of poverty, this is how we all benefit. And again, getting the economy moving again helps us all. All right, so now, what are your specific solutions and how do they benefit both individuals and society? So take a little time to write that. And actually would love, as part of that conversation, speaking to Marianne's question here, how do you identify that that's something that make it universally available? I would love to kind of hear your reaction as you start to see other people share the way that they're talking about their solutions. Take a few minutes. And hearkening back to the thing that, or what Carlos was saying about aspirational communications and that fundamental functional level, this is where a lot of that messaging comes in. What functionally are you doing? Just how does it show up in the day-to-day? How's this going for folks? Beautiful. Awesome, Tanya. Yeah, and this is that place, really specific. This is awesome. Educate, re-educate. Kathy, can you say more about what your question is? I'm trying to recall.
Either you or Carlos had mentioned earlier about educating, re-educating, and I don't know if it was motivating or moving forward or.
Does anyone else remember? This is so bad. It's one of those reminders of, oh man, I'm just on my roll.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't recollect right now.
I was just thinking about the events that we put on. We try to, start at a place where we can educate, but for some people, I think about like trauma-informed care. They might know a little bit about it or be familiar with the term, and then you take the time to sort of re-educate them on what that means and then move everybody forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that sounds like it's really thoughtful for the type of work that you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It might have been motivate, I think.
Talk about, motivation is, I mean, you're lifting up here so much in the chat, everybody here, that tapping into that, obviously we know it works for communications and is so important for the work that you do in terms of motivating students, motivating people to take action, really tapping into what makes them want to do something, to overcome that inertia, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Great. So want to push a little bit more. What is the benefit to society? How are your communities different? Thinking back to those original drawings. Yeah. Healthier community, honoring the full community. That kept coming up, this sense of really honoring and celebrating who you are as a community. And I think that that is such an empowering part of this work, is it's really not just people wanting to get out, to leave and go seek opportunity, but this really lifts up the whole energy of a place. Great. So as your minds are mulling over this, we are going to put on the screen some quick tips just to think about, and actually take a break. It has been 2 hours, which is insane. And these somehow always fly by. But what we're going to be doing is, in our last bit of time together, is pulling all of these together in breakout groups. And so thank you so much for staying engaged for these last 2 hours. Take 5 minutes. So let's actually 5 after the hour. Come back, turn off your videos, go stretch, go get some water, do what you need to do. And we will reconvene 5 after. Thank y'all so much so far for being so engaged and thoughtful. We're learning a lot from you too. welcome back as folks are coming on back. I feel like it's very risky to give a break after a 2-hour conversation and then have people come back, but I feel like if people do return, it's a testament that this is helpful. So we hope it is helpful. All right, just give another moment or two. That's right, Jamie, the engagement basket. All right, so what we are going to do next is turn everything that we have done and talked about over the last several hours and turn it into that message, turn it into that kind of core narrative that can help you frame and structure communications of all kinds. Again, this is the beginning of this sort of work, but hopefully it provides some useful fodder and framework to be able to develop communications going forward. And so as an example of what we're talking about, we're talking about this 1-minute message. Again, we're often in times where people don't have a lot of time. We just need to get their attention quickly, open their eyes to want to learn more. Here's how what we shared from that Ford Foundation work shapes out into a potential 1-minute message. Hardworking people across the country are striving to make a better life for themselves and their families, but don't have the opportunity to achieve financial independence and long-term security. People goals. Many jobs don't pay enough to allow people to save money to get through emergencies, much less pay for education, buy a home, or put money away for retirement. Many policies benefit those who need the help least, while overlooking people who start out in life with less opportunity, lose their jobs in tough economic times, or face other obstacles to financial security. Again, super specific about that problem, pointing a finger at really what the real problem is. Government, the solution, can offer proven tools that help everyone save and invest for the future. Savings plans to help families finance their children's education, buy their own home, put money aside for retirement. These really tangible visions. Effective government programs and fair policies like Social Security that invest in people and support financial independence. So that's what something can look like after we go through this work and what we're going to ask you to do as well. And so we'll actually send you into some breakout groups. I don't know if Jamie or your team, if you wanted to say anything about contextualizing the breakout groups, but you'll probably recognize people in there.
Yes, so based on the attendee list, we broke you out. And so for the most part, you will be in your particular network. So if you're from Cradle to Careers for Siskiyou, you should see some recognizable faces with perhaps, a couple others from out of your Cradle to Career collaborative, but that will help give you diverse perspectives. So with that, I think there may be a few that Hattaway has questions on. Just shoot me a chat and I will get it to you.
Yeah, perfect. I'll open the rooms now. There may be a couple rooms that have maybe a fewer members. I know there's some people that have been jumping in and out, but Veronica and I can join in on those and help keep the conversation going in those. We'll give folks about 10 minutes to, as a group, work together in what could be a 1-minute message. And then after that, we'll all come back and share. I'll give everyone, when we're closing the rooms, the 2-minute warning on when we'll be coming back to the main session. Thank you, everybody. Okay. There's one room that only has 2 people in it. Oh, okay. Okay. Veronica?
No. And Kevin, do you have an invitation to go into a room? Maybe still
Should
returning.
have it for a break at room 5.
Might still be returning. Yeah, do you want to send me in somewhere?
I'm gonna send you into room 5 because there's only 2 people in there right now.
Perfect.
Okay.
welcome back, everyone. All right, so it is Friday. We are having just an awesome conversation. Thank you all. Would love to hear what's coming out of some of these conversations. Feel free to, just raise your hand, pop in. You can write in the chat if you want to share something. We would love to hear any general reflections, or also if you felt like you made some progress in writing out maybe this more structured message, this narrative that we've been talking about. But yeah, how are we doing?
Can I ask a quick question that didn't come up at my group?
Sure. Actually, Carlos, do you want to unscreen share so we can see folks?
Oh, we don't have to see me. I'm good. All right.
Your art is cool. It's so
well, the question that I have was around the people piece, and how we describe people, and I totally get that, and I'm on board with that. A lot of the way that we end up talking about some of the work that we do, and and it kind of goes back to, I don't know, I'm not going to make a lot of sense, but what Kathy had said, and what, I'm thinking about, like, can we put something in there? I mean, I wouldn't say confused youth, right? But like, we're doing career exploration to help folks kind of guide them to help find their own pathways. So what word could we use for those, because really we're trying to, like, they're not confused, but maybe it's undiscovered yet, right? What would be the words in a nice way that would capture that?
What does the group have to say?
We experienced something similar where we want to show the aspirations of that age group, trying to think of the right word, and words became very important.
And one of the things I would say, not that there's no right or wrong answer here, but if they're describing themselves as confused, like, what language are they using to talk about it and echo that? That is fine. I don't think that you're losing anything by calling someone confused. I've been there, and it's nice to be able to see, oh, this is actually, you acknowledge my experience.
Yeah.
Unexperienced youth. Inexperienced her.
It can also be about passionate young people who are feeling lost.
There you go. Okay. I like it.
Yeah. That create, like, attaching to that emotion that they have right now, that they feel lost.
Yeah.
It's very powerful, because we've all felt that at one point, and feeling lost and voicing that means that you want to find a path, and that's where you come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And everyone's felt that before, so people can identify with that potentially. So
exactly.
Okay, that helps attaching the motion and being able to actually just use that in this. I was trying to encapsulate that one word, like that would, that people could describe themselves, but that helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's actually a cool visual too.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the things that we're seeing in our mind's eye, and I love this, like the exploring, just discovering. We're trying to figure it out. So how we set that up. Other reflections or questions?
Right before we came back, we had an interesting conversation. Started just looking at the people. Mm-hmm. We identified all those various components of our society, like youth and families and learners and employers. And then the question came to, well, is our collective impact, we're not all directly serving all those populations, because we're a collective group, we're often serving those who serve, or we're networking and communicating and bridging with those who serve. Mm-hmm. So we were trying to come up with that people phrase. Yeah. And Dawn was saying something and we got cut off.
Dawn, finish your thought.
Well, what I was saying, when we were talking about that, went back to the picture drawing, because I couldn't really show you because I've got this background and it cuts everything out when I move around. But everybody talks about Weed. Why isn't it a college town? College of Siskiyou is the only community college in Siskiyou County, and it's in Weed. Why isn't Weed more of a college town? So the picture I drew was actually the kind of the bubble one, like a brainstorming one. Here's the city over here, and businesses, schools, community, residents, churches, and so on. And over here is the separate bubble, which is the college and our students, not necessarily community, but students in the area, out of the area, the businesses that we work with, the partners, the schools. But then how I would like to see it is, here's a bubble that's the city and the college combined in all of those other outreaching arms to it. Does that make sense?
Hey, Donnie, how about Communities College? Because I'm sitting in a campus in Wairika called College of the Siskiyous.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that was bringing the county into it too. So
Communities
I had a couple
College.
seconds to draw, George. I couldn't draw everything.
That's a neat idea, George.
Yeah, and we've experienced that with some other clients who are like, our work ultimately helps students, but do we work directly with students? Sometimes not. And what we have sometimes recommended is try to find what's the passion that ties everyone together. So it can be as simple as we work with people who are passionate about helping students find their path. So it's not necessarily you saying, I work with the students, but I work with the people who ultimately help the students. And that's a passion that is shared by many.
Yeah, and back to those very early asset-based qualities that you were sharing. Those, again, those are not just words that describe students or people in classrooms or today's learners, but all kinds of folks and probably a lot of the partners that you're working with as well. And that is a totally appropriate champion to be part of your narrative. We've been focusing it on students because it's kind of the thing that grounds us all, but all of this is really flexible, thinking about your audience being a lot of different types of folks.
Any other questions folks had in their groups? Yurts of inclusion, I like that.
Yurts of inclusion, yes.
Okay, well, I know we've reviewed a lot of material today. So like I said, we're gonna send out the presentation. And with that, I'll include our emails. So if you have follow-up questions on the materials, or you've thought about more in your message and you just want to get our take on it or any feedback, we're also here for that. So please feel free to email us about that. But
Carlos, can I ask a question about the slides? There were a few slides that specifically pictures that really resonated. Do we have permission to use it in other presentations related to cradle to career efforts?
So are you talking about like some of the photographs in it?
Yes.
So I know, I think that's a thing I'll ask our graphic design team, but I believe those are like stock images that they buy, like,
okay,
right? Should I be like, anyone can buy them, but I don't know if it can be used like specifically for promotional materials, but I can get them to give me like the link of where they bought them. If you are interested in your team also like using those, I can get you like where they bought them and where you can locate them.
Oh no, we have it. It's just, it's so perfectly put together. I just wanted to see if you could borrow the slide.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah. Also, like if you have any of our tools and frameworks that you all want to use, feel free to use them and credit us. But that is also an option.
I'm hearing, Jamie, did I hear a drum roll? I think you.
I do want to do this. So while everybody's been talking, I have been engaged by creating a very systematic, I won't screen share, but spreadsheet, people will be surprised, it's a spreadsheet tracking tool of engagement. I'm sure will be a validated tool very soon. But, well, it's a very fancy spreadsheet. My top engagers are on these notes here.
Now, is it about quality or quantity here?
There was a lot of factors. It was weighted.
Okay. All right.
All right. So somebody got the drum roll. I can't do both at the same time. All right, there we go. Okay, and our winner, let me make sure she's still here. Didn't bow out last second. Okay, is our very own Marion Murphy Shaw from Cradle to Careers for Siskiyou. Yay!
Oh, Siskiyou! Woo!
So I will be.
I'm so excited I can't unmute.
I will email you, Marion, for your address to mail the basket to. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Like
thank you all
so
much.
Well. Everybody was so engaged. It was great. And I don't think it had anything to do with the fancy basket.
Thank you all for letting us chat with you in this morning.
Well, on behalf of North State Together, this was amazing. The opportunity to come together like this. I will admit that I was a little bit afraid of the virtual format, but I thought it went off wonderfully. Thank you so much, Hattaway. If you guys, if you have any follow-up, just send it my way as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions for our North State Together partners here. Kevin, do you want to say anything?
No, thank you to Hattaway for your flexibility and your leadership. And we have something really special going on in the far North State right now, and hopefully you could feel it from where you're at. And we're going to continue to do good work and hopefully have you back in the future. So thank you.
Thank you all. The energy is very clear.
Can I say something real quick? This is Donnie. So we have our launch event next week for Cradle to Careers for Siskiyou. We've got a really good program that we've been working very hard on, and I hope you all will be able to join us from 11 to 1 or whatever time you can give us just to peek in. So.
You bet.
All right.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great